Hi, I'm Mandy and welcome to today's video. As winter comes to a close, I wanted to round out my set of seasonal gaming videos with a little winter vlog. Now this one's going to be a bit of a different style to my previous ones. It's been a very busy season for me, so I haven't been able to do as much gaming as I would have liked. But I have been doing a lot of game hunting, and a lot of traveling. In December, we drove over 1,800 miles through 5 states to spend Christmas with my husband's family in Wisconsin and Michigan. This was a lot of fun because I got to see more of America, we got to spend time with family, and we got to visit a lot of new video game stores. So I of course wanted to share that with you. I also thought it would be fun to share some of the video games that I was given for Christmas. I was very lucky to receive some of the games that I've had on my wish list for a long time. And Tony also surprised me with some really special collector's items from my favourite series. So I guess that makes this a sort of travel, game hunting, what I got for Christmas video. It's a bit all over the place, but I hope you enjoy it. I'll do my best to keep things organised and interesting, but as usual, you can check the description for timestamps. So let's begin. So after packing up our little Buick, we headed out on the first leg of our journey, which took us through the valley of some beautiful snowy mountains. It was going to be a very long journey to Wisconsin, so we definitely needed some entertainment for the way. My game of choice for the trip was Tactics Ogre Reborn. So if you're unfamiliar, Tactics Ogre is a tactical RPG by Square Enix. It originally came out on the Super Famicom, but it's been through quite a few iterations since then. Reborn is an updated version of the PSP remake. They've added quite a few changes in this version. For one thing, your level is capped at a specific number during each stage of the story, so you can't really level grind. In a way, it's kind of nice because it encourages you to play the game strategically rather than trying to overpower yourself in brute force battles, but this does mean that the game can be quite challenging if you don't have a good understanding of its systems. They've also added these things called buff cards, which are cards that spawn randomly across the battlefield that give temporary boosts to stats, like physical attack, crit rate, and so on. They make a huge difference, but they are very unpredictable and sometimes a bit of a hassle to get. But yeah, Tactics Ogre is quite a game, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. Anyway, back to our trip. So after about 6 hours of driving, which may or may not have involved a wrong turn or two, we finally reached our first stop in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This was an absolutely stunning place. We were staying at a ski lodge in the mountains, and it truly had some of the most beautiful views I'd ever seen. As an Australian, I find snow so magical, so I was really grateful for the time we spent here. We decided to stay for a full day because there was so much to see. We went on a scenic drive through the Grand Teton Loop, which was truly breathtaking. I think it must look incredible in the summertime. So yeah, Wyoming was a delightful stop. The next day, we continued our adventure and headed towards South Dakota. Now, our plan initially was to have a bit of a scenic wild arms trip through the Badlands, but as it turns out, South Dakota gets very snowy in the middle of winter. But Tony had already put together a pretty sick Badlands playlist, so we threw it on and made the most of it. And then, as if by fate, we happened to drive through a very brief stretch of road that gave us a little taste of Filgaya. So that night we stopped in a small town close to the Badlands National Park, and it was very charming. Again, very snowy, but definitely embraced the spirit of the Wild West. Our next destination was Rochester, Minnesota, which we were really excited about because we had our eye on a few retro game stores there. So, you know the drill, another day of driving. This time we happened to drive past Midgar. And about 7 hours later, we finally made it to Minnesota, where we promptly ate dinner and fell asleep, ready for a big day of game hunting. So this is where the fun starts. Now thankfully we had time to stop by 2 stores before heading to Wisconsin for the last leg of our trip. The first one was tucked away around a little corner off the main road and rather fittingly called Hidden Gem. This was a really cool stop. As you can see, they had a lot of fun things here. I was excited to see Shenmue on the Dreamcast, which is one of my favourite games. They also had the Orange Funtastic Nintendo 64. This is the one that I have back home, so it was really nice to see it again. So from this store, Tony wanted to get me this green VMU for my Dreamcast, which was very sweet. I really love these things. And we also grabbed this Steelbook edition of Final Fantasy XII on PS2. It was only $12, so we couldn't really pass it up. The next store we went to was called The Machine Shed, and it was really impressive. The store was pretty busy and also a bit squishy, so I just took some photos rather than trying to film anything, but from these pictures you can get an idea of the scope we're dealing with here. We didn't end up getting anything from this store because we were in a bit of a rush by this point, but I really wish we could have spent more time here. Seriously, they had games up to the ceiling, and a big variety of strategy guides and consoles too. So later that night, we finally made it to Wisconsin. It was so lovely to be back. Wisconsin is where I spent all of my previous trips to the US, so in a way it feels kind of like a second, or I guess a third home to me now. It was nice to finally have a chance to relax after that big trip, and also to see our friends and family that we'd been missing since we moved. And over the couple weeks we were there, we of course made time to revisit some of our favourite stores. So our first stop was GameStop, because, you know, it's always fun to see what's new with them. I did end up grabbing Little Dragon's Cafe, which I know doesn't have the best reviews in the world, but it's a game that I've been curious about for a long time, and, you know, when you're on holiday it's easy to just throw everything under the umbrella of souvenir and call it a day. Our next store was Half Price Books. I've been longing to return to Half Price Books for a really long time. We don't have any where we live now, which is sad because we love video games, board games, and books, so it's a really nice one-stop shop for us. They had a few interesting things here. We've got The World Ends With You on Nintendo DS, the Somnium Files Collector's Edition, Persona on PSP, which I would have been really tempted to get if it had the case. I also found this VHS of one of my favourite Dragon Ball movies. In the end, I just ended up getting a few odd manga volumes. Firstly, we have volumes 2 and 4 of Cold Sept, based upon popular Dreamcast and PS2 video games. And I also got the first 2 volumes of Dot Hack Legend of the Twilight. I've been wanting to get into the Dot Hack universe for a while, so I thought it might be worthwhile to pick these up while they had them. They did have a store-wide discount going that weekend, so all these books were only a few dollars each, which was awesome. Now this next up was so much fun. Game Trade is a retro game store that I heard about many years ago and have been dreaming about visiting. I finally got to live out that dream, and they did not disappoint. They had one of the biggest selections I've ever seen in a game store, covering a ton of different systems. And they had some really fascinating collector's pieces too. Probably the most interesting thing was this little Fire Emblem glass crystal. I'm not sure what the story is behind this, but as you can see it was very pricey, coming in at $1,300. There was a lot to look at here. They had a huge PC section, which Tony had a grand old time digging through. They also stocked quite a few import titles, which is always nice to see. So we ended up getting quite a variety of things from Game Trade. First up, I finally got the North American release of Final Fantasy IX. I never actually had my own copy of this game, but it's one that I played many years ago and hold very dear to me. Next we have a Dreamcast game, and that is Space Channel 5. I see this game pop up all the time when I'm looking at Dreamcast stuff, and I've always been very curious to try it out. It's kind of like a Simon Says style rhythm game where you have to memorize button sequences and then play them back in the rhythm of the music. It's pretty fun actually, and it's got a really zany storyline too. Also, it has a lenticular cover, which is pretty neat. I also got one DS game. Their DS section was pretty big, but a lot of it was shovelware and titles that are geared more towards kids. So not a lot of interest to me, but I was excited to grab Scribblenauts for $5. I missed out on this game back in the day, but I've always loved the premise of it, and I've heard that it's really good. I know there are lots of newer versions out now, but as a DS lover, I really wanted to have the original and experience it on the DS. And the last pickup for me was Final Fantasy XV, which is a game that I already own and played on release actually, but the American one is shiny. And it was only $8, so I couldn't say no. And Tony did end up getting a few PC and 3DO games. We've got Might and Magic 6 and 7, which are classic RPGs from the 90s. I don't know a lot about them to be honest, but these old PC games are very much Tony's thing.
You know, like Wizardry, Might and Magic, Ultima, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment, those kind of games. I feel like
the way they put together these little bundles is pretty cool. This one comes with the cloth map, and this one has a strategy guide. And they were on sale. He also got Microcosm for the 3DO, and again, this is out of my area of expertise, but it definitely looks cool. And finally, we have the Silver Case. This is actually a limited run games release, but they just had it going for retail, which is nice. It appears to have everything in there. It's a pretty cool box actually. Now this game has been on my backlog for a while. I think I have it both digitally on the PS4 and physically on the Switch, so I really need to get to work on that. You might have heard me mention that I love board games, and as it turns out there's a fantastic specialty store in Wisconsin that stocks not only a ton of board games, but also anime and gaming figures, manga, comics, miniatures, and more. They were actually having a store-wide 20% off sale for the new year, so that was fun. So I ended up grabbing the first few volumes of the Persona 3 manga. Persona 3 is my favourite game in the series, though it was also my first Persona, so there may be some bias there. It was really nice to start reading these and to revisit this world again after all these years. I have been very tempted to grab the P3P remaster they just released, but I really need to work on my backlog. I also got Fushigi Yugi Byako Senki, which is a spin-off series of Fushigi Yugi. I adored Fushigi Yugi as a teenager, and I still have a soft spot for it, so I couldn't resist picking this one up. It's a relatively recent release actually, and the story is ongoing, so it'll be nice to keep up with it. Tony also got Volume 1 of the Final Fantasy Ultimania archive, as well as the Final Fantasy XV Official Works book. Both of them are fantastic books with a ton of story information, behind the scenes, and artwork. Now, while we're here, I feel like I need to share some of the gifts that Tony got me for Christmas because he was incredibly thoughtful and generous, and I am so appreciative of everything he picked out for me. So this first gift he got for me was the Amori Christmas mug from the Omo Cat Shop. I was so excited about this mug. I've been using it almost every day since I got it. It has such beautiful attention to detail, and the artwork as a whole is so wholesome and perfect for Christmas. It's got Sunny's violin on the inside, and then a little Amori on the bottom, which is a really cute touch. A bit of a side note, but I also got myself the Amori calendar, which was released during the same sale. I love this thing so much. All of the artwork is seasonal, and the scenes they've created are just so lovely. The next thing Tony got me was Grandia Extreme. So one thing you might know about me is that Grandia II is my favourite RPG of all time. It's the one that really started my gaming journey, and it has a lot of meaning to me personally. Its sequel Grandia III, as well as this spin-off, were never released in Australia, so I unfortunately never got a chance to play them. I know there are ways around this now, but I wasn't very computer savvy as a kid, so I just never got around to playing them. Grandia Extreme didn't get very high reviews. From what I've heard, it's lacking quite a bit in the story department, but I mean, as a massive Grandia fan, I'm sure I'll love it for what it is. With the IP gauge and Noriyuki Iwadare's music, you really can't go wrong with me. So Ace Attorney is one of my favourite series, and Tony was sweet enough to get me not one, not two, but 3 of the Ace Attorney Game Boy Advance games. These were the original releases of the games, which were exclusive to Japan. When the Nintendo DS came out, they each received an updated DS release, which thankfully did get localized and became the Ace Attorney games that we know and love in the West. So these are really just collector's items for me, as the huge Ace Attorney fan that I am. It was really cool to see all the details on these boxes and manuals, and to be able to see what the game looked like in its original form. This next gift surprised me quite a bit. So this is the Grandia Extreme Limited Box, which is a special collector's edition that was released in Japan. So of course we have the Japanese version of the game, and it also comes with this beautiful pocket watch, which I'm assuming is a replica of a story item in the game. And there's also this lovely pouch for it. I think it's a really cool collector's edition, and I am so grateful to have it. Now, I had no idea what to expect when I found this next present under the tree. So this is a Grandia III compass, which is something that I'd never seen before. It sounds like they were a pre-order bonus for the game, which is super cool. I'm so happy to have one of my own. Tony also got me Shiren the Wanderer GB2 on Game Boy Color. So this is a Japanese import, as you might have gathered. If you saw my last video, you'll know that I've been on a bit of a Shiren the Wanderer kick lately. I love the gameplay in Mystery Dungeon games, and Shiren is really the main series within the Mystery Dungeon franchise. Unfortunately, most of the games were never localized, including this one. I think we only have 3 games that were officially translated, so I'm really excited to have this one. This next gift was a Japanese import of Wild Arms 4. This was another surprise to me. If you've watched some of my other videos, you might know that Wild Arms is a series that is very dear to me. I've never played 4, but I definitely want to one day. This next one was something that I'd been eyeing on eBay for a while actually, and that is the History of Grandia Sound Adventure box. Usually this comes with a Japanese copy of Grandia 3, but Tony said he found a really good deal on this one because the game was missing. So he decided to throw in the US copy of Grandia 3 instead, which was a wonderful surprise. It feels surreal to finally own a copy of this game. When I was a kid, I wanted to play this game so badly, but like I said, I just didn't know how to go about it back then. I think this game is going to be a really great experience for me. I don't expect it to have anywhere near the level of impact that Grandia 2 had on me, but I'm sure I'll love it all the same. The Sound Adventure box also comes with a special History of Grandia CD that has some select tracks from each of the games. I think overall it's a really beautiful package, and I'm so excited to add it to my Grandia shelf. And my last gift from Tony was the Grandia II Perfect Guide from Versus Books. This was another kind of surreal thing for me. When I was a teenager scouring the internet for Grandia collectibles, I'd see listings for this guide all the time, and I was always interested in it, but I never got one for myself. They didn't retail in Australia, so there was always a pretty high shipping cost on them. But now that I live in America, I guess all my Grandia dreams are finally coming true. Flicking through this was really cool. I have a few other guides, but they're all in Japanese, so being able to actually read this one and get the full enjoyment out of it was really special. The writing has a lot of charm to it, actually. RPG meets platformer as you press X and leap across the rocks in front of the cascading falls. I also love the graphic design of it and how they've added these random pictures of the characters throughout. This is a really special thing to have in my collection, for sure. So those were my presents from Tony. Again, I am so appreciative of everything. He put so much thought into these gifts, and I'm going to cherish them always. My family also sent me some lovely Christmas gifts. For the sake of time and trying to stay on theme, I'll just show you some of the video game related stuff. So my mum and dad found me this Breath of the Wild cookbook, which was so thoughtful. I always feel so grateful when people pick something out for me. A gift that you've never specifically asked for, but someone wanted to get you because they knew you'd love it, is priceless in my opinion. My sister and her husband got me Potion Permit on Nintendo Switch, which I'm really excited to play. I love crafting RPGs, and I think the pixel art in this game looks so charming. It seems very up my alley. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I also received The Legend of Final Fantasy VII from my niece. I think this series of books is fantastic for fans of the games. I read the Final Fantasy VIII one a few years ago, and I loved it. The first part of it was an in-depth recap of the game, which kind of read like a novella version of the story. Then it went into some things about the game's development, impact, and also discussed a few fan theories, which I found really fascinating. This book was written by different authors, but I'm sure it's just as good. There's a lot of material to work with, and a lot to talk about when it comes to the impact of Final Fantasy VII, so I think it's going to be a great read either way. So yeah, we had a pretty busy Christmas in Wisconsin. For New Year's, we drove to Michigan to see my father-in-law, and he was also extremely generous and gifted me a bunch of games that I had on my wish list. Honestly, at this point, it kind of feels like too much, and part of me feels a little bad sharing all these things in this video because I just feel so spoiled. But at the same time, I do think it's fun to give you a bit of a glimpse of the kind of games I'm interested in. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have people in my life that want to do things like this for me, and I definitely don't take that for granted. My brain does a fantastic job at linking material items with memories, which is probably the biggest reason I like collecting physical games in the first place. Every time I look at my Grandia shelf and see my Japanese Dreamcast copy of Grandia II, I'm instantly taken back to my 19th birthday, and how excited I was that my dad found one for me. I never really mentioned it, but it was something that I'd always wanted to have. And he just knew me so well that I never needed to ask for it. And so when I look at this game, I'm just reminded of how blessed I am that I have a dad like that. Similarly, when I look at Super Bomberman R, I think of my birthday in 2017, which was 2 days after the Switch came out when the game seemed to be sold out everywhere. But somehow my dad managed to track one down for me. Fun fact, when I moved to America, I only brought 5 Switch boxes with me, and Super Bomberman was one of them because it makes me think of my dad and all the things he's done for me. So anyway, all that is to say that I'm one of the sappiest people you'll ever meet, and I'm definitely very appreciative of all the gifts I've received this Christmas. So on that note, I'll show you some of the things I received from my father-in-law. First up, we have Punchline for the PS Vita. This is an Uchikoshi visual novel, so I had to have it, though I hear it's pretty different to the kind of thing we're used to seeing from him. This is actually a visual novel adaptation of an anime he wrote, which is interesting, seeing as it usually goes the other way round. It doesn't have fantastic reviews, but I'm excited to try it out nonetheless. Next up, we have some PSP titles, Phantasy Star Portable and Phantasy Star Portable 2. So these are action RPGs that are part of the Phantasy Star Universe series. I love Phantasy Star Online, and the gameplay and setting in this series looks similar enough that I think I'd really enjoy it. I often find myself yearning to return to the world of Phantasy Star, so I'm glad to have these games around. Also, fun fact, on the original print of Portable 2, someone accidentally left this picture of the game's cover on the back, which I can only assume was being used as a placeholder image or something. I have no idea how that escaped quality control, but it's pretty funny. I also received Phantasy Star Online Episode 3 for the GameCube. Like I said, I loved Phantasy Star Online on the Dreamcast, so I'm really happy to have the conclusion to that saga. The other thing that makes this game so interesting to me is that the battle system is actually a card game. I think it would have been really fun to play this online when it came out, but I'm happy to make do with offline mode for now. Next, we have The Guided Fate Paradox and its sequel, The Awakened Fate Ultimatum. These are two games that I used to see at JB Hi-Fi all the time, and I was always really curious about them. What I've recently realized is that they're actually dungeon-crawling roguelikes that appear to have very Mystery Dungeon-style gameplay. So that makes me very happy. And next we have a game that's been very high on my list for a good many years, and that is Radiant Historia on Nintendo DS. This is one of those big DS titles that I've been wanting to play for an embarrassingly long time, so I can't tell you how excited I am to finally own it. I know it has a 3DS remaster now, and Tony does have it actually, but I don't know. For me, it was always a DS game, and I really want to play it there. And actually, most of the time, I do prefer DS games to their modern ports. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to playing Radiant Historia. I think it's going to be a great experience. Now, my father-in-law also got me a bunch of 3DS games, which is so appreciated. There are lots of 3DS games that I've slept on. Honestly, for most of the 3DS's lifespan, I was still using it to play DS games, so I didn't get a lot of the new releases for the system, even though there are a lot that I'm interested in. With the impending eShop closure, it's been on my mind a lot, and I've definitely been feeling the pressure to scoop those up before they get too expensive. So these first two games were at the top of my priority list, and they are Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Gates to Infinity, and Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon. Like I said, Mystery Dungeon games are very dear to me, and that is thanks to the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series, and specifically Explorers of Time. I know that these two don't have the best ratings in the series, but obviously I still want to give them a try. I think I'll have a great time with them nonetheless. Next up, we have Gyakuten Saiban 5, otherwise known as Ace Attorney Dual Destinies. We never got a physical version of this game in the West, unfortunately, so this is one that I've been wanting to add to my collection for a long time. This was actually the only Ace Attorney game that I didn't have physically in some form. I'd love to display them all together, but unfortunately half of them are still back home in Australia. One day though. The next game is Monster Hunter Stories. Again, I am so grateful to have this. I know this is one of those ones that's getting a bit pricey online. I loved Monster Hunter Stories too, so I really wanted to try this game out. It's got turn-based combat and is set in a beautiful and vibrant world, which can be such a refreshing thing sometimes. Next is Tomodachi Life, which surprisingly was another very high priority game for me. It's a silly me game, but you know, I kinda love that. Every now and then, I do crave a more lighthearted game like this.
I'm Miss Mandia. My nickname is Mandy. My birthday is March 5th. My favorite color is black. I'm Miss Mandia.
And finally, we have Shin Megami Tensei 4, which is particularly interesting to me because it's one of those ones that never got a physical PAL release. We did get it digitally, but, you know, it's not quite the same. The last thing I have to share from my father-in-law is pretty cool, and that is the Guide to Japanese Role-Playing Games published by Bitmap Books. So this is essentially an encyclopedia of JRPGs, and it's pretty epic. It's over 600 pages, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a JRPG that isn't featured here. I love that you can use it to reminisce about your favourite games, but also as a reference to learn about ones that you might be interested in. I think it's an incredible book, but I do have to firmly disagree with their take on Grandia II. I think labeling Rowan as an obnoxious little kid is a gross misrepresentation of his character. Rowan is the most well-mannered, optimistic, and responsible young man I've ever met in a video game. And if you play through the game, I think you'd be impressed to see just how well he carries himself in the face of the challenges before him. And another thing. They write that, while the battle system of Grandia II sees some decent improvements, overall the game loses some of the heart of the original. Grandia II is full of heart. Now, I'm of the mind that gaming is very subjective, and I completely respect people that prefer Grandia 1 over Grandia 2. I am not here to say that 2 is a definitively better game, because I don't think that's something that can truly be measured. I believe that a game's merit rests in its ability to make an impact on the people that play it, and obviously that's something that varies between people. That said, Grandia 2 is the game that I prefer, and I don't believe it's lacking in heart at all. I thought Ryudo was a great protagonist. He's a person that's been through a lot in his life, and when we meet him, we see the impact that's had on him. He's cold and snarky and not the most optimistic guy in the world. Personally, I always found his personality rather charming, but regardless. The story is largely about his personal journey to face his demons, and I won't spoil the game obviously, but he learns a lot on his way there. Each of the main characters go through some serious personal struggles throughout the game, and we get to see them grow not only as individuals, but also as a group. And there's a lot of heart in that. Not to mention the fact that the game is full of important lessons about morality and the importance of individual responsibility. And that's just the story. The music, the voice acting, the design is overflowing with attention to detail and passion. I think Grandia 2 is a beautiful journey, and maybe it won't capture everyone's emotions, but it certainly captured mine. More than any other game ever has, and probably more than any ever will. Anyway, yeah, so again, I am so grateful for all the gifts that my father-in-law gave me. The 3DS games especially took a big weight off my shoulders. And it was a really lovely visit overall. Throughout the time we were there, the three of us played through the entire main story of Chaos Bane, which I talked about in my last video. That'll always be a really nice memory. So after New Year's, we went back to Wisconsin and stayed there for a few days before heading home. We went through most of the same states, so I don't have many new clips to share. But we did stop by Mount Rushmore this time, which, again, as an Australian, was a really cool thing to see. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but we actually brought our PS5 on this trip, so we thought it would be fun to spend some of our downtime on the way back playing Judgement together. A fantastic decision, I think. The trip was a lot of fun, but also very exhausting, so it was nice to just sit down and play some video games together. Judgement has been a lot of fun so far. It's about an ex-defense attorney turned detective who ends up going on a bit of a personal quest to uncover the truth about some of the events that happened during his time as a lawyer. And the combat in this game is just insane. There are tons of really silly and over-the-top moves you can unlock, and it's a lot of fun. I'm excited to see where the story goes. So yeah, a few days of driving and Judgement, and we finally made it home. So that was my travel, game hunting, Christmas extravaganza. Once we got home I did finish Tactics Ogre, which I ended up putting about 90 hours into, so it took up quite a lot of my time. Since then, I've been playing Fire Emblem Engage and Octopath Traveler 2. I've been trying to stop overlapping games this year, but I just couldn't wait to play Octopath. So far, both of these games have been incredible, and I'm excited to continue playing them. So yeah, that's it for the winter video. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time.